Heritage Month. Today we're going to be talking about mental health in South Asian communities, and I'm joined by a fantastic panel to discuss this today. So we've got Serena Clement, who is an early careers trainee program director at Health Education England, Sachin Patel, who's a senior manager at Boots and also the lead for the Reach BRG, and Umar Khan, who is a mental health advocate and the founder of Men Empowerment. And also, I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Aman, and I'm the head of professional belonging here at the RPS. So nice to meet you, and thank you very much for the panel for joining me in this conversation today. So the reason why we chose mental health for a particular topic for South Asian Heritage Month is that we know that opening up about mental health issues can be difficult anyway, but particularly in South Asian communities, it's actually quite hard. It's quite a taboo subject within a lot of Indian and South Asian households. And so today, out of the panel discussion, we wanted to explore why it's a taboo subject and what changes we can make to talk about it and make it easier to talk about it. We've all had experiences, or we all know someone who's had an experience of it, and we want to be able to be in a position where people can get help that they need, and particularly if it's impacting the workplace or whatever the cause, we want to be able to make sure that we can talk about it openly. And so also wanted to explore how it can affect genders differently as well, the different pressures that men and women face, and or if you're gender non-binary, what that might look like, particularly in the South Asian community, if you're again from another taboo group that it feels like it's hard to talk about. So and also just how mental health is seen in South Asian communities. So I was thinking about one of the reasons why, and stigma is a big part of that. And if you think about the language that's used and the vocabulary used to describe mental health within South Asian communities, it cannot be very positive. So I know from a Punjabi perspective, and I think in Urdu and Hindi it's the same, but Pagal describes mental health, which means crazy in English. So, even the vocabulary that we're using isn't very positive. And then there's an element of shame surrounding it. So we just wanted to talk about that. So it's quite a bit of a heavy topic, but hopefully, we'll be able to have a very open conversation. And again, for anyone's listening, please do pop any questions that you might have in the chat box on any of the platforms that you're listening on, and we'll try and answer them too. So we'll make a start, and we will, if I just ask everyone to kind of give a bit of an introduction and why mental health is important to them and a topic that they've wanted to talk about. So Sachin, I'll start with you.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get myself off mute. That's typical. Sorry. So, first question, Aman, was just a little bit about myself. Yes. Sorry, the screen froze while you were asking the question.
Oh, I see. No worries. Yeah. So a little bit about yourself and why this topic is important to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, a bit about myself. So I'm a pharmacist, been with Boots for over 25 years now. Worked within stores and field, and now in the support office role, and do lots of activities outside, working with football fans, both at local level and up to national level, through different football supporter associations. This topic's really important for me because it's within South Asian communities. What I've found is both in a personal and professional level is we don't talk about it enough. People suffer. There's shame. There's stigma. There's lots of different ways people perceive mental health, and because we don't talk about it enough, it's not normalized, and because it's not normalized, people shy away from it and try to deal with it themselves, and unfortunately they don't have the either the appropriate support networks, or they don't have the appropriate advice given to them, and sometimes people go down the darkest routes by themselves and end up committing committing suicide, and that's sort of why I'm here today, is to try and tackle some of those stigmas and hopefully normalize mental health conversations within men, especially because I've seen it firsthand, and the impact it can have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sachin. And Umar?
Hi everyone. Yeah, so my name's Umar, and so I'm the founder of Mempowerment. So I started Mempowerment last year around April time, I believe it was. Um, so the reason that I started it was because that I went through my own mental health experiences, and I didn't want people to go through it alone or feel like they weren't able to talk about these kinds of things. And then I recently became a mental health first aider as well. And so Mempowerment has started after that, but I think that was the last straw for me, because listening to the statistics of 75% of suicides being male, so that stat, it broke my heart. And so that was one of the reasons that I started Mempowerment, to be able to make a difference, to show men that it's okay to talk, and we have to open up about these things, and not keep it into really sort of try and reduce that number. And I guess that goes to your second question about why this topic means so much to me. Is because that there's to for the amount of people that die by suicide, you have to be in a real sort of like dark place to be able to do that. And it's just trying to give people that platform, especially men, to be able to talk about how they're feeling and the things that they're going through, to understand that there is help out there, and that it doesn't make you any less of a man if you talk about how you feel and what you're going through, because at the end of the day, we all struggle. We all struggle. So yeah, that's why this topic is so important to me, especially seeing it in the South Asian community, and being a person of color and having my own stigmas around mental health and not wanting to seek therapy and stuff like that. I used to think that therapy was for crazy people, and that's just a sad reality of it, because that's how I was sort of taught. And you can't go to therapy. Yeah, it took me a lot of time to unlearn that stuff myself. So I'm just here trying to do the same thing for other people.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it, when you've had that own experience and you know how frustrating it can be.
Yeah.
And thinking about other people not being able to access that same help. So thank you. Serena.
So my name's Serena, and I work in pharmacy education. I think, well, this topic is important to me because I have friends, and I say that plural, who suffer with mental health conditions. On the surface, if you'd see them, you probably would never guess. But through conversations that I've had with them and supporting them, there's you just never really know what's going on in a person's world and what's going on behind the scenes, and that they can paint a smile on their face, but actually you don't know the reality of that situation. I'm going to answer this question in a slightly different way, in that if I think about my own mental health experiences, I'm going to talk about another taboo topic, which we don't really talk about in South Asian culture, which is periods. And the reason I bring it up is because I know my mental health is very much correlated to where I am in my menstrual cycle. And so I will have days where I feel really motivated, I feel really empowered, I can, ready for the day. And then I will have other days where I will cry for absolutely no reason at all. And it will be over the smallest thing. And sometimes there is no reason for it. And I have that rational side of my brain telling me, you know why you're crying. It's because you're on your period soon. So snap out of it. And beforehand, I would try and tell myself to snap out of it. And I'd find that actually in the long run, that would have more of a detrimental effect on my mental health. Whereas actually, if I just admitted that, today I don't feel great, and I'd marinate in that feeling and admit to myself that I'm not feeling that great today, in a strange way, I'd feel like a weight is lifted because I'm being honest with myself. And that almost felt like half the battle. And so I think, as I was saying beforehand, it's a case of trying to understand what that individual's experiences is and supporting them in a non-judgmental way, because you just don't know what's happening in a person's world.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. And because it ebbs and flows, doesn't it? It's not always a consistent thing. And I've had my own experiences of that. And I do have depression, and I know people will think, oh, but you're so smiley, because I've had this before as well, that, I didn't ever expect you to say that, but it comes and goes. And I always say that my depression is a bit of a blessing because it's forced me to look after myself in a way, like you said, just accepting that there's going to be good days and bad days and just be nice to myself, which I wouldn't have done probably if I didn't have the I suppose the clinical condition of depression, because you just kind of feel like you have to keep going. And, you know, part of this conversation is my parents. I love them, but they really struggled with what that looks like and what that means in a practical sense. And, you know, you can't always have a reason for crying. Sometimes you just don't feel like getting out of bed or whatever that looks like. Not everything has to have a linear correlation, which I think that people struggle with. So I think that's a really important point. And so I know we haven't, well, the next question is like, why do we think that mental health is a taboo subject? Because that's the one thing I always, particularly in our culture, is the question why, and I always get beat down for asking too many whys because, you know, you should just accept things the way they are. But I just wanted to explore with you guys, why do you think that mental health is a taboo in South Asian communities, and what, and the second part of that question is, how has that impacted people in seeking help and getting the help that they need? So Uma, in your experience, through the services and your own personal experience, why do you think it is a taboo subject?
I'd say it's a taboo subject because it's been like seen as a deficiency. So along with like the derogatory language that comes with it, you know, like your bargle and like all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's what I think it is. It's seen as derogatory, like it's seen as a deficiency, and it's not talked about. You know, like and that's another reason I'd say that it's not spoken about, because there's not enough knowledge. You know, I've spoken to the older generation before, and they said, you know, didn't exist when I was younger, or you know, I mean, but it's always been there. But I think it's a case of them not knowing that, you know, mental health is just as important as your physical health. You know, and if you were to, you know, like every day, like you go to the gym or like you go for a walk, you know, for like your physical well-being, you know, what are you doing for your mental well-being? And yeah, so I think that's what it is. You know, they said like it didn't exist when we were younger, and it's been such a deficiency that I think in the Asian culture, you know, we care very much what people will say, what people will think, and I think a lot of the time we're so focused as a community on building rather than building a life that we'll say, oh no, you can't tell so and so that you've got depression because you're this person's son, or you know, you're this person's granddaughter, or whatever. What they're gonna say. But actually, it's just like saying, if they were diagnosed with diabetes, I'm sure they'd happily say, yeah, I've got diabetes. But you know, if they've got depression, or you know, they're suffering, you know, they're going through something like mentally, they're just not allowed to talk about it. And that's a huge impact, because you know, like if you're not allowed to talk about something at home, or you know, it's frowned upon, how do you then go out and seek help from someone? Because you have to do it, you know, like slyly, because you'd have to go out and maybe lie to your parents about where you're going. We might be going for a therapy session. It's so difficult. And then if you're then talking about your trauma and the things that you've gone through, you're now technically exposing your family. So now you're talking about them, and that's another thing that's just, you know, why are you airing out our, you know, dirty laundry? Like, why are you here talking about what we've gone through as a family and stuff like that? So I think it is really deep rooted. It is really deep rooted, and yeah, so a change needs to come. I think the generations now, like, they're moving sort of forward and they're seeking help. Still not as much as we should be as a community, but change is coming. But I think there just needs to be a lot more education, especially with older generation, to, you know, help them understand what people go through.
Yeah, no, it's true. Thank you, Uma. Serena?
I completely agree with everything that Umar says. And if I think back to like my grandparents' generation or great grandparents' generation, like Umar was saying, it just wasn't spoken about. And I think even the term mental health, people don't realize, well, some people don't realize that just as we all have physical health, we all have mental health. But that actual term mental health, they coat it, that actual term itself, in stigma. And so even when you try and bring up a topic of mental health, suddenly it's fall on deaf ears because people don't necessarily want to hear about that. And I would like to think that with sort of the next few generations coming through, people are becoming more open to talking about it, even just having conversations like this. A setup like this, I'd say even maybe 10, 20 years ago, probably wouldn't have necessarily been seen. So I think there is definitely being progress made. It's more of a question of what speed is that progress being made, and facilitating that environment for people to feel comfortable to actually open up, speak about their own experiences, and not view mental health or struggling with your mental health as a weakness, but actually there is so much strength that comes from being honest with yourself, admitting how you feel, and having that emotional intelligence as well. And I think if we start changing the narrative into that respect, it will empower more people to be more confident about speaking about their mental health.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Serena. Sachin?
Yeah, John, I echo the points that Uma and Serena have made. It's interesting because for me, from personal experience, it's really about stigma. It's about what people within the community will say about you, your family. You know, it's, you know, for the people who are fairly religious, it will be, well, what did you do in a past life? You know, you must have been bad in a past life to have these types of things impact you. And mental health varies. It ranges, you know, from anxiety and stress all the way to, you know, clinical depression. You know, there's different forms of it. And the problem is that some people within the South Asian community don't want to listen and don't want to understand it because they feel it's not their problem. And because we don't talk about it, and because they feel it's not their problem, they don't really understand how they could potentially support. What can they do? You know, a simple thing, as somebody said to me, is, you know, you ask somebody how they are, they're always going to reply, yeah, I'm okay, even though inside there might be something really, really wrong, and they're not feeling great. But ask that question straight away again, how are you really doing? And people may then potentially open up, and that's something that I've started to apply and started to use when I'm having conversations with people, because and it's worked. And, you know, I sit down with my mum and have a conversation sometimes, and I know something's going on in her head and she's thinking about something, but she won't say it because she's going, oh, I don't want to worry him, or I don't want to worry anybody else, and I shouldn't really talk about it. But when she does, she feels so much better. And it's those types of small conversations which help. And then I've seen her go off and speak to my auntie that way, and it's great because then they have a conversation. So you see the benefits of it. But it's the taboos. It's the older generation. My granddad, bless him, he's 99, still lives with us. But couldn't dare tell him about this, because it'd be like, well, just get on with it. Well, you know, just like Omar said earlier, get on with it. What's, you know, doesn't exist, does it? It's just all in your head. Well, yes, it's in my head. We just need to do something about it.
Yeah, no, it's true. And then you get the, you know, well, life was hard back then, so you just got on with it. There's a lot of trauma, generational trauma, you know, that has been carried through, and we've got it easy now, you know, apparently, in some ways, yes, but, you know, but it's just, it's always compared, isn't it, and how actually we managed it. So and I think the other thing is access. You know, you need to see people like yourself represented in, say, accessing mental health services, to know, because I know I've had experiences of accessing mental health services from Caucasian people who don't understand culturally what I'm experiencing, and then that relationship doesn't really work because they're not understanding what my needs are and where I'm coming from, because it's not just one dimensional. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience, Umar particularly, where actually the access isn't correct either, because it's not, you know, it's we've got additional needs culturally that might need to be considered.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'd say, like, I experienced it myself, like even like when going through like therapy, like the first time, the like lady that I like, who was my therapist, she would give me like advice, and it was just completely, it just didn't align with culture. You know, it's like, you know, okay, that this happened, yeah, but just stop talking to, you know, your family. And you're like, well, I can't really do that. But it's like, you know, it is difficult, but, you know, like I got a new therapist, and actually he's very much very understanding actually. Also like he's Caucasians, but again he's very understanding. He understands culture, and so that's a massive benefit. So I guess it is about having that education as well, but going out and sort of seeking that education before dealing with see our people from different cultures and stuff like that. But I definitely do think that like we're underrepresented in that capacity. So we don't see many people of like color who are therapists or work within mental health, and that's what I've seen personally. And it's like that reflection of success. So for example, if you see someone again, like, so if we talk about regards to football, we don't see many South Asian footballers. But if you, like, for example, if me as a coach, if I'm coaching South Asian kids, or like one or two South Asian kids, and they see me, it's sort of that, okay, well, he's a coach, so I can sort of go further. And I think it's very similar, like with regards to mental health, that if your therapist was South Asian, you'd be like, oh, actually, like they'll get me, they'll understand it a little bit more. But then obviously it encourages you to want to speak about these things. So the more sort of the more representation that we have, I think there'll be more South Asians and people of color coming forward to talk about these things.
Yeah, and I know that's something we've done really in pharmacy with pharmacist support, is try and look at that representation. And Serena Sachin, a little bit of a change in tact, I suppose, considering today is results day as well for our foundation trainees to pass to qualify. What is the additional pressure of trying to be the best that you can be, a lot of pressure of being a professional, having a professional job and passing your exam on top of your mental health? So Serena, in your experience, have you found that actually there is an additional pressure on trainees as well?
Yeah, I think we're probably all culprits in putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, and dealing with failure is probably another thing within South Asian culture that we don't talk enough of either. And again, there can be actually a lot of strength that comes from failure. There can be a lot of lessons learned that can take you forward. And what I strongly believe in is that you learn more from what you fail at and what you get wrong than what you do from what you get right. And I think sometimes, especially on days like today with the assessment, it's really reinforcing that message as well. And, there's so many messages at the moment, really, celebratory messages that people have passed their exams, and that's absolutely brilliant. But there is also that flip side of it, and people don't always share that, actually, I didn't pass this time around. And it's those ones that are quiet about it are the ones that I then worry about more so, because who are you talking to? Are you talking to anybody? And I think for anyone who has got their results today and maybe it hasn't gone the way in which they intended, my message would be, please do talk to somebody, whether that be a friend, whether that be a family member, whether that be someone who sat the exam that you know of as well, whether that be pharmacist support. Please do reach out for that help, because just through talking, it's that whole thing of a problem shared is a problem halved. And as cliche as that may be, there's a lot of truth within that as well. And I think, again, as pharmacists, we have this tendency of wanting to constantly find the solution. So if someone isn't feeling well, let's find a solution. If you're not feeling great, let's find the solution. Sometimes about taking a step back and not necessarily finding a solution as such. It's just being that listening ear, allowing that space for somebody to be vulnerable, to understand that their feelings are validating their feelings, that they are being heard. And again, in that non-judgmental space, but it doesn't necessarily need to be about finding a solution for them. Actually, it could just be about sharing your own experiences as well. And the more that we share about our experiences of when we failed, I'm sure all of us on this call and anyone who's watching have all failed at something at some point in their life. We don't go through life without failing. Failing is a part of life as it is. But again, it's another thing that we need to talk about and share how we dealt with that. What was our mental health during that stage? How did we overcome that? What tips, techniques, tactics did we use? And being that listening ear.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Serena, because you only see the positive, don't you, on social media, and that's the risk of it. And Sachin, what about your experience?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, obviously today's results day for people who did exams back in June, and 20% of the people who took their exam have, I think it's come out today saying that they've not passed. And it's, we know that statistically, we know that a large proportion of people who work within pharmacy or who are training to be pharmacists are from the South Asian community. And within the South Asian community, it's always, back in my time, I know it was always, you had to pass. You had to be a success. If you didn't, failure is not something you bring home. It's just not acceptable, and that causes more stress, tension. I felt like that. I've always felt like that. Being the eldest in my family, first one to go to university properly within my family, I felt that, and I know that was there in the back of my mind always. I was lucky enough to get through, but equally, I failed at things, and it feels awful. But it's that network, it's the people around you, how they pick you up, how they build you back up, is the most important thing. And I think that's the difficult thing, is for people to understand. Yes, like Serena said, if you fail, it's how do you then come back up? How do you bring yourself up and go forward? Because then failure actually helps you become better, and sometimes you have to fail to become better. And I think that's something that we need to instill in people, is that it's okay to fail. It's okay, but try it, do it, give it a go. Don't let that stop you from achieving anything. And yeah, you're right, John. Social media, it's one of those things which is great sometimes, but equally for the people who are not in that great place, seeing everybody go, yeah, look, I passed. I think a simple thing like putting a tweet out right now to somebody to say, if you have failed, speak to me. Sometimes they just don't want to speak to their family members. Sometimes they just want to speak to a stranger, somebody who's been there before, possibly. And just be kind. I think that's the key thing, isn't it? That's the key message for me, is be kind.
Yeah, no, good point. I think we could do a whole podcast about a panel session about being the oldest in an Indian family. I think there's lots to discuss even just within that, but you've made some good points. So we did say we were going to talk about it, particularly from like a gender perspective and how the impact can be. But from a male perspective, what additional challenges do you find that you experience, in tackling your mental health? So Sachin, I'll come back to you on this one.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because we're not supposed to talk about our feelings, especially men. It just because it's a sign of weakness. That's how I grew up. Understanding it. If you had an issue, if you had a problem, you just sort of kept it to yourself. You dealt with it yourself, and that was very much it. It's a big taboo, and things like the way language is used as well is really, really impactful. So things like words like "don't cry like a girl." It sort of it discourages you from opening up, because people say it to you, and you just feel belittled at that point, and therefore you sort of question yourself and go, right, is it really a problem? Should I just man up? That's another thing. So I think it's really, really difficult for men, especially. And it's you see it, like Umar mentioned, 75% of men. It's the people who commit suicide. 75% are men. So clearly there is an issue, and I don't know the stats for how many South Asian men it affects, but I'm guessing there's a high proportion of South Asian men within that. And I think the concern, we sort of said it, we've said it before, and it's the challenges are that it's society, it's the way that things are portrayed, things in the media, on TV, movies. You see, men are big, strong characters. That's the way. There's an image that's being portrayed out there. You see it on Instagram as well. That's the ideal. That's where you got to be, and you should be talking. But then there are people who have come out, who are in big, high-profile positions, who have said, "Look, I've suffered from anxiety. I've suffered from depression. This is my journey. This is where I've got to." And that's what we need, is we need more people within the South Asian community to come out and say, this is what I've done. High profile people who've said, look, I've been through this, I can get through it, so can you. This is what I did, and that's how we maybe get better engagement. But it's having those conversations and not being afraid to have them. So Umar, I know you're not afraid to have those conversations with the elderly group. Likewise, I'm having those conversations with the older generation. It's difficult. It's difficult to get them to understand. But even having that conversation gives them something to think about at the end of the day.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sachin. Uma?
Yeah, so just sort of very similar to what Sachin said, really, that, you know, I suppose as a man, like you're the provider, you're the protector, you know, and that's what it is. Like you go out and you do what needs to be done, and that's what it is, really. So you shouldn't, if you are going through something or you are feeling a certain way, like, you don't need to talk about it. You keep your head up and you deal with it. You go out and you carry on living like your day to day as normal, and you sort of try and push it out, but that doesn't work, nor does that help. Hence why we have such a high statistic in males dying by suicide. You know, it's horrible. And like Sachin said, you know, I'd love to see it as well. You know, how many South Asian men are affected by that? Yes, like we have this overall statistic, but if we break it down and we look at the different, you know, the different like age groups and you know, ethnicities that these people, like these men, come from, you know, what are we doing to sort of try and, you know, tackle this number and, you know, have more of an understanding of what's happening in our own community, because it's so difficult, you know. And this, I think it also comes down to, you know, being told, you know, like, listen, like you're a man, and, you know, men don't talk about stuff because that's what women do. Women talk about their emotions and they express their feelings. Men don't do that, you know. Men just get on with it. And I think that's what it is. Again, the language that's used, don't cry like a little baby, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, just echoing what Sachin said, but I think that's what it is. It's because we're seen as less emotional, maybe, you know, like men, you know, women are more emotional as they, and so they show emotion more. So we shouldn't be. So as soon as you express how you're feeling, that's it. It's seen as a weakness, and it makes you less of a man.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a real shame, isn't it? Because that doesn't equate to that at all, and you still need help.
One bit I'd say personally, like if you were to open up and talk about how you're feeling, like that makes you even more of a man. I'd say, you know, to shed a tear and like to be able to cry and say, look, this is what's really got me down. You know, that really sort of would, yeah, I'd say that would, if anything, make you more of a man. To be able
It's
to
a sign of strength. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a sign of strength, isn't it?
yeah,
And
100%.
Serena, in your experience as a woman, I know actually you just mentioned about women being emotional, but women are allowed to, from my experience, and Serena, it'd be good to hear your experience, but women are allowed to be emotional, but then that's different to being allowed to be having mental health issues, if that makes sense, because it's expected for women to be emotional and then you put them in the corner and off you go. But to have a mental health illness or condition is completely different. And Serena, in your experience, what do you think the additional challenges are for women as well in South Asian communities?
I think that's it, isn't it? It's double standards. So a woman can be emotional, but not necessarily seen as weak, or maybe we are seen as weak. I'm not sure. But when a man is emotional, that is seen as weak. It's double standards. And like you said, the lines then probably get blurred, because when you are dealing or struggling with your mental health, you're then probably just still seen as just being emotional. And then not necessarily taken seriously for how you are feeling. Personally, for me, I am that type of person where if something's on my mind, I have to vent it out to whoever will listen to me. I have to get it out of my system, because otherwise I can't sit with it and brew it. And that's my way of dealing with things, and that sort of, I guess, talking therapy in many ways. And with the network of friends I have, that's kind of how we all try to deal with things, whether you're man, woman, whoever, that's how we all express it. And I found it interesting about Sachin saying about asking how are you, and then asking it again, because that very much resonates with me. That's something that I've picked up as well. Ask it 3 times, how are you? But how are you really? But how are you really? And it's usually on that 3rd time that then it opens that space for that conversation. I think it goes back to what I was saying previously, is that we can't feel entitled to judge other people based on how their mood is that day or what they're experiencing that day, because you just don't know what the backstory is beforehand. And therefore, whether they are crying like I will because I'm due on my period, or whether there is something more deep rooted in that, it's about trying to understand that person's perspective and unconditionally being there for them as well, and creating that space to be able to speak openly, which is definitely a hard thing to do. And I think by expressing your own vulnerabilities, as we all are doing today, it does very much sort of pave that way for other people to then feel that, okay, I can express how I'm feeling as well. Even if the conversation starts off as being quite one-sided, maybe the next time around that you speak to that individual, actually they then feel that they are in this safe space where they can fully express how they are feeling too. And you get that conversation going, and then you get that deeper understanding of why is it that maybe somebody isn't feeling too great today, or what's going on in their world. But it's communication at the end of the day, isn't it? That's the key essence of this, and feeling comfortable enough to be honest with yourself, but also be honest with other people with how you're feeling.
Yeah, no, it's kind of answered the last question. So I was just going to say thank you for this conversation, and I'm sadly going to have to call it wrap it up, because it's been such a great conversation, but we are just mindful of everyone's time. But one last question for everybody, we have kind of touched on it throughout, was how can we remove the taboo about talking about mental health? And we have said being more open, and and having those more open conversations and asking people genuinely how are they doing. But was there anything additional that you felt that we should be proactively doing to help remove that the taboo? So Umar, what do you think from your experience?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely like education, like for sure. So like, we should be educating that the older generation and stuff like that, for them to be able to have a bit more understanding. It's not like, I feel sad, oh yeah, have a cup of tea, or what have you got to be depressed about? You've got a house, you've got a good job, you've got a nice car, all this kind of things. Like, what's there to be depressed about? So I guess it's a lot more than just looking at material things and saying, what are you depressed about, or why are you feeling like this, or why are you upset, because you don't have anything to be upset about. But I also do feel like we need people who are like a big influence, in the sense of like celebrities, and people who are sort of like role models for the South Asian community, to maybe come out and talk about their experiences, because then they will be able to relate to that, and might make them a little bit more open to talk about mental health. So like my page in itself is for all men, but I am trying to get more South Asian men and Black men to open up and talk about these things, in the hopes of, so what I try and do is I'll reach out to as many people as I can and try and share a story every week. Someone who's gone, they'll talk about the mental health experience, just in the hopes that someone will see it, be able to relate to it, and say, oh, actually, I've been through that as well, so I can talk about it. So yeah, I think that's what we need.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, more education. Serena?
I think the only additional thing that I'll add is to keep talking and keep sharing, as comfortable as you feel to talk and share, because obviously you're putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. It's a scary thing to do, but if we all start doing it, even just a little bit, it will start to normalize that conversation to the point where maybe one day we will get to a point where we talk about depression in the same way we talk about diabetes, like Umar was saying earlier. It's not seen as this really taboo big subject that people want to steer away from and don't want to talk about. It's just spoken about in a very normal way. But the only way that we can get to that is to start normalize those conversations now. And so to keep talking, I guess, is the main message.
Brilliant. Thank you, Serena. And Sachin?
Yeah, so from a professional perspective, I think the key thing for me to take out of this is keep pushing in culture into education, right from the trainee pharmacist levels, and not just pharmacists, but everybody who works within pharmacy. I think that's key and important, and I think that's happening through all the DE&I work that's happening within the industry, which is great. But I think by understanding and knowing a bit more about the people that you're serving, the communities that you're serving, you're going to be able to listen and understand better. We talked about, Umar talked about it earlier in terms of the therapists, and how them being aware of culture help them understand and tailor their responses accordingly. But from a personal perspective, I think Serena, you mentioned it, and it's talking, but it's normalizing it. So showing that men, women, people that look like you are having these conversations, and if it's okay for them to have those conversations, then it's sort of it's okay for me to have those conversations too.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you, Sachin. Thank you so much for taking part in this conversation today. And even from the chat that I'm seeing on like LinkedIn particularly, it has engaged a lot of conversation. So thank you to the listeners for engaging with this. And there's some suggestions of how we can get what we can do and more talking, particularly from an educational perspective. And maybe there's a space here within the communities to have those, maybe in faith places, to have those conversations more across different generations. So thank you so much for the conversation today. Just to say to anyone listening that if you feel that you need to reach out to anybody and to talk about your mental health, you can reach out to Umar. There's an empowerment page. We've got pharmacist support who'll be able to provide support as well. And if you feel like you just need to chat, I'm sure you can also DM me and want our panelists as well. So it's just to say to anyone listening, if this has been triggering, we're here for you. So, but there are places to access support as well. And just to say, probably on a bit of a lighter note, that the South Asian Heritage Month is still continuing until the end, mid-August, and we've got another panel session on Monday at 7 p.m. Pharmacy technicians of colour are going to be taking over RPS channels, and they'll be talking to people, sharing their experience of being South Asian and what that heritage means to them. And there'll be a Twitter chat on coming up, and we'll share the date as soon as we've got that. And we've got our quiz coming up as well, again on social media, so look out for that. But you might have noticed that we're sharing profiles of South Asian pharmacy team members, and if you wanted to get involved, you can email us with your profile on iand@ourpharmacist.com. But again, final very big thank you to the conversation today. I think that this is the beginning, and we need to keep having these conversations. So I'm looking forward to doing this again. And thank you for everyone listening. So thank you, everybody.